and then we, so thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Welcome. Many people are dropping in at the moment. We are at 70 participants, and I expect a lot more. So we have a large group. Thank you all for participating. Welcome to the webinar Towards Risk Sharing. The perspectives on localization and risk management in the context of COVID-19. COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the critical role played by national and local NGOs, humanitarian organizations, to an unprecedented extent. And at the same time, COVID is posing new risks for humanitarian responders, especially to local actors in a critical role. Wider efforts to strengthen the support to national and local actors in the response are ongoing. This webinar will focus on the topic of risk management and poses the following question: how can we better share risks between local and international actors in the humanitarian responses? And this webinar is organized by KFOD, Coordinate, Charter for Change, the Dutch Relief Line, the Global Interagency Security Forum, and CUNO, a large group. My name is Peter Heinze. I'm from CUNO, and I will moderate this webinar. And CUNO is the platform for humanitarian knowledge exchange in the Netherlands. Thank you all. Now we are almost at 90 participants, and the numbers are still growing. I hope you all will, you attendees will also participate to this webinar. So there's not only listening and viewing to us, but also share your comments. You can share your comments via the chat box, and you find the chat box via the toolbar below in your screen. And if you have specific questions, please use the Q&A button in the same toolbar. And you can do so if you'd like to without your name anonymously. You can tick the box anonymously, and then we won't know your name. And if you don't tick the box, we will know your name. And I really would like you to share your comments and your questions. And we can't possibly answer all questions. We will pick out the most relevant, and we will share the questions we cannot answer during the webinar with the speakers. And perhaps they have some time later this week to give brief answers to those questions. So we will do something. We will give follow-up to questions we can't answer during the webinar. Basically, we have the next 90 minutes, 3 blocks. We start with the local perspectives on risk sharing. We have voices from Myanmar, Nigeria, and Lebanon, although I'm not sure we have all people yet here, but most are there by now. Then we have reflections from different perspectives, from the international NGO perspectives and from some donors. And then it's time for open discussion. And then it's time to introduce my co-hosts for this afternoon. Inge Leuvering, she is the chair of the localization working group of the Dutch Relief Alliance. Inge will, in the end, share with us her conclusive remarks, the wrap up at the end. And I'm glad you're with us, Inge. I hope you're ready for it. I see so. And we have Howard Mullet. He's head of the humanitarian policy at COVID and member of the Charter for Change coordination group. And Howard is, I think, one of the instigators of this webinar. He was, I think, months ago already planning a webinar like this and have been working hard to it. Howard, could you please share with us a little bit of the history of this webinar, but also what you would like to learn today? What are your takeaways?
Thank you, Peter. Basically, the relationship between risk management and localization was raised as a priority at the Charter for Change annual meeting last December, where a range of national NGO partners were raising this from every region globally. And we heard at that point that the Dutch government and the ICRC were planning to convene some kind of discussion on risk in humanitarian action linked to the grand bargain process and those wider conversations about the reforms that need to happen in the humanitarian system. And so we wanted to basically inject a localization perspective into that conversation. Now that Dutch ICRC event got postponed due to COVID, but we understand it will be happening later this year. And that we wanted to follow up with convening this anyway. So really, I'll just leave it at that. And I think the key point has been it's been so interesting to hear from the national NGO leaders that are joining us today and others that have fed into the thinking of the framing of this. And so looking forward to hearing what they prioritize as, share challenges and opportunities for ways forward, and then the responses from international agencies and donors reflecting on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Howard. You will stay with me because you will help me out with the huge amount of chats and questions and answers that will follow undoubtedly to pick out the right questions and the right chats to reflect upon by the panelists. From the donor side, we have reflections from DFID and from ECHO, and from the international NGOs, we have reflections from Lindsay Hamsick from Interaction, but we start, of course, with the local perspectives, and I will introduce all the speakers decently later, but I start with 3 speakers from the Global South, and I believe we have now 2 online, so I'm a little bit worried about the 3rd speaker. We have for certain Dr. Win Toon Ki. He is Director of Karuna Mission Social Solidarity in Myanmar. Thank you for having you with us. We have Fadi Haliso. He is Director of Basme Zetonu in Lebanon. And we are still waiting on Josephine Haba, National Coordinator of the Jiradu Foundation in Nigeria and National Coordinator of the Ningo Net, the Nigerian NGO network on humanitarian development. And Josephine was called away because she had a meeting today with the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. So I'm a little bit afraid she's caught somewhere in a meeting she can't leave at the moment. So we start with Dr. Win Toon Ki. Glad to have you with us, Director of the Karuna Mission Social Solidarity in Myanmar. Please share with us your perspective on risk sharing between local actors and international actors. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. So to all the participants, greeting from Winton-Chi, National Director of KMSS. And today I would like to share KMSS experiences of how the committed partnership helped KMSS manage the risk. To give you a brief background, KMSS is established in 2001 under the Catholic Bishop Conference of Myanmar. Internationally, we are affiliated with the Caritas Confederation, but we hold the full autonomous local faith-based identity. So we are genuinely local NGO. When I took the office in 2011, I made a very quick scan of KMSS and found that there is a gaps in our systems. And I asked our partners that I wanted to improve the systems. Can you help me? So I started with the finance policies and human resource management policy making because I see those 2 policy which is very important to manage the risks of what we are doing. Our partners dedicatedly contributed 2 years programs for this policy making. And by 2016, we have a very, very good 2 policies strongly in place. Fortunately, around 2014, Caritas Confederation launched the management standard. This is a very comprehensive institutional development tools, and KMS has happily embraced these opportunities. Again, our partners support us with another 4 years of implementation programs to this management standard across the KMSS. This is very complemented with another 3 years accompaniment program, which is also focusing on institutional capacity building by the same partners. And we could really reinforce our strong systems across the 17 offices of KMSS. So one remarkable experience was that in 2017, we became the strategic partners with the Livelihood and Food Security Trust Funds in Myanmar. LIFT, in short, is the multilateral funding mechanism managed by UNOPS, which aims to improve the livelihood in Myanmar. On the other side, it has a very strong focus on strengthening local civil society organization. That's why KMSS and other 5 local CSOs are engaged with LIFT as a strategic partners. We get 3 years pure institutional development program from LIFT Fund. This really boosts up our institutional capacity around leaderships, governance, and ongoing system strengthenings. We completed the first phase lately, which was appraised very well in our evaluation, and we could continue the second phase, which will end in 2023. In this second phase, KMSS is extending this institutional development service to 30 other Myanmar civil society organizations at this point in time. The civil society partners of LIFT is now even directly engaged with the fund board of the LIFT. It's a very rare opportunity for us. Hardly we CSO never had engaged with our donors directly. We engaged mostly with the intermediary grant manager, but now we could engage with the LIFT fund board. We can engage directly with the donors. It's a very good relationship building, and also we can help the donors see what is the ground reality, especially around risk management situation. With those investments, now KMSA is a trusted local organization in Myanmar. We have diverse nationals and international partners, both internationals and all the bilaterals and multilateral donors. And annually, we are managing around 10 to 50 million US dollar projects across Myanmar. We have passed all key donor due diligence tests with low risk ranking. So allow me to look back the 10 years journeys of KMSS. When I look back, I see a long-term institutional capacity building by our partner is the key which makes KMSS today. I'm very glad that localization workstream commitment number 1 captured this point very clearly. Long-term investment in the capacity of these local actors. By having this continuous investment, make our system strong and also improve our institutional development, which leads to improve our accountability and transparency. In turn, it enables us to manage the risk more effectively and efficiently. Then we can avoid a lot of great mistakes. We can avoid a lot of risky situations. Finally, we build trust between donors and actors. As I shared with you earlier, we can even now directly engage with the LIFT Fund Board, which is very rare opportunity for the local civil society. Well, to give you one trust example, in this COVID pandemic, when COVID hit Myanmar, the KMSS, its civil society partner, collectively engaged with the LIFT Fund, and then in less than 2 weeks' time, we agree on 1.5 million US dollar COVID response programs. Needless to say, trust definitely plays in this quick processing. Otherwise, you know, multilateral funding, their bureaucracy is very big and we may need to wait maybe 1 or 2 months time. But now, less than 2 weeks, we can make a 1.5 million agreement response. Trust is the very big factors in it. KMS engages the government and health departments, and with their advice, we procure a quality product here to combat the COVID. In this lockdown, we switch our procurement and finance transition by using the IT systems, by following the standard procurements and financial policy. At the same time, we are not sacrificing or risking the procedure that we should be taking. This rapid adaptability overcomes the risk of delay the life-saving services reaching to the people who are most needed our services. Those are the examples of mitigating and managing risk in our operation. It did not happen overnight. There is a decades of investment, now it's pays off. Risk management is, in my opinion, is a two-way accountability. Donor accountability, in my opinion, is to help establish the systems and institutional capacity in the delivery organization. This is very true to localization commitment. This needs long-term commitment. From the implementer side, from our side, we have to try our best to establish and apply the systems and increase the accountability and manage the risk properly. Follow that, there should be constant negotiation between the donors and the actors so that our shared risk management based on ground reality. I will highlight the roles of the strong established civil society like KMSS, who can be the natural capacity builder to their fellow local CSO. I will call it local to local capacity building, which simply speaks peer learning. Only then we are true to the people who contributed to us, to our mission. At the same time, we are true to the beneficiary who we are committed to serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Win. And I did write down for myself, investment in risk management, it pays off. On the other hand, it avoids all kinds of risky situations. Thank you so much. I think we have to move on fast to the next speaker. And I believe we have Josephine Haba with us, although she is now connecting to audio. So I hope she will be with us within a second. Otherwise, we go first to Fadi Haliso, because I'm not sure whether Josephine, connecting to audio. Josephine, are you with us? Please, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. I will introduce you properly now. We're glad to have you on the webinar. Josephine Haba, National Coordinator of the Zero Do Foundation in Nigeria, and National Coordinator of NingoNet, the Nigeria NGO Network on Humanitarian Development Initiative. I'm very happy because you're almost running towards the minister, I believe. Please could you share your reflections on risk management between the local NGOs and how international NGOs and donors might be more supportive. Please, the floor is yours, Josephine.
I appreciate everyone possible for me to be here at this moment. Thank you for the opportunity for trusting a local partner to be at the conference like this. Quickly, put that away. And quickly, I would like to quickly speak to that which is my task this morning. Can I share my slides or just speak to them?
Yes, you can share it via share screen, so it must be possible.
Okay. Can you see them?
Not yet.
Okay, maybe I should just speak to the slides. I don't want to take any more time, so let me just speak to them here.
Yeah, we can share them afterwards with the audience, if it's okay with you.
Oh, sure, yeah. I quickly want to take a quick overview on the risk management, risk sharing and mitigation. It's been quite a privilege to see certain things happen now that were not happening in the past, but obviously so much is not happening. With the declaration of the coronavirus as a pandemic by WHO, so much happened that we already know. And over all the lockdowns, all the policy activations from moving for very good reason, having to get some expatriate staff evacuated back to their home countries and organizing so many high-level winning, activating. All of that happened. But much more, in this phase, we still had some funding stream that came in for COVID-19. But did it come with any change? That's what I do not think happened. With it was not so different from the pre-COVID-19 guidelines for assessing some of these fundings, which to me meant so much because in the face of all of this, what you want to see is work done quickly, but sometimes because we are not really guided with some of and provided some of those support, the LNGOs sometimes do not get such capacity to respond as quickly, even when the others are not going to field. Even when the partners were evacuating staff, for us at the LNGO, this was a luxury for us when people had adopted new ways of working and were not able to go to field. We had to go to field because we had contractual agreements with partners, which will not be compromised even though there was coronavirus. We had to meet our targets. We could not manage GBV cases from behind our computers. So we had to go to field. But there are a lot of constraints even going to field, which was not supported. So I am speaking right now, I want to speak right now on how to ensure this risk is shared and mitigated. I think that the agreements which we have reached, the agreements which we work with partners should be paid attention to. You know, the budgets which we bring forth for the partners, the local organizations, the LNGOs to work with us should pay attention to ownership of the risk ownership which we have identified. We, amidst all of the risk, we see that an LNGO try so that they can meet timelines and keep their responsibility keep themselves responsible to the agreements they have signed. We try to compromise staff safety, which should never happen. So I advocate strongly that on no account should staff safety be compromised to meet partners' expectations so that risk can be shared. And I say that in capacity enhancement, we should pay attention to capacity enhancement, having to have the big partners who have got all the capacities come into the room and work with NGOs from their offices, make sure that we have vice versa, have secondment of local NGO staff, come to work with them to better have working relationship and have knowledge shared in the manner that it will be sustained. And for security management, we see constraints so much with the management of security in terms of not having, the platforms that will have joint responsibility frameworks for security. You have INSO, which is for the international community, international organizations. Sometimes even when they share these informations, the one that you don't share with others, that is for us who are local partners, because that is international platform for security management, but we work on the same feed anyway. So we think that if it is visible, let's have a joint security responsibility framework, and also to ensure that resources, additional resources from partners should be made deliberately from donors to INGOs to ensure that partners have in their narratives and the budget templates deliberately recognize the security challenges of the local partners while they are responding to their calls. And in resource mobilizations, we want to work directly with development donors to see how resources will be mobilized to local organizations, and particularly the multi-year frame funding streams that will be for institutional strengthening of local partners. This will give the local partners the opportunity to have all those capacities that is always talked about. No capacity is the reason why we are not able to give funding directly. It will have those questions responded to. And to talk a little bit again about the sharing, ensuring budgets of to include management fees that will help us respond. For instance, at this moment of our lives, we were buying face masks for maybe €1, and then today we are buying face mask packs for 20 or 30 euro a pack. What was going for €1? If we have management costs in our budgets, it will help us in that flexibility to manage the risk of our staff going to field. We will not take in transport and then having to put many people inside, because the management cost will represent having more transport provision, even though it is not on the budgets that we have signed. So we also think that including, to include LNGOs in the humanitarian, the amounts, the domestic rules and regulations should be looked at to provide more direct funding, to local organizations. I'm saying this because of the summit, the humanitarian summit and grand bargain commitments, which are, yes, at some level being implemented, but which are questions questions that we need to answer. And to finalize, I want to also talk a little bit on the partners establishing insurances for their staff. There are group insurances that every other international organization that is coming to Nigeria that have for their staff, but it's not a line in the budget of any donor, any local partner. If you try to do anything like that, sometimes you lose out on the bid for that funding. There are group insurances. There are several insurances that our partners, our local partner staff do not have, which is something that we need to pay attention to be able to share and mitigate this risk. And then we finally, to undertake comprehensive salary survey in country. I don't know about other countries, but I think that salaries are key to the reason why international organizations take staff from poach staff from local organizations, because the reward system is really not standardized. We will think that as sharing this risk so that we can ensure for sustainability, we should standardize the reward system in country transparently and harmonized at the local partner cost, so that we don't see today we have a staff, tomorrow the international organization is paying higher, so it's taking away our staff. And then another organization gets more, and so it can take even poach staff within ourselves. So I think the standardization is very key to this risk sharing, so that we have a level playing ground, at least as local partners. We're not asking for equality with the international organizations, but we are just saying, for the commitments which we have made, can we respect them, especially in the face of COVID-19? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Haba, for those strong words and all those practical examples you shared with us on how we can improve the risk management in a proper way. I did write down for myself a couple of points. Please pay attention to capacity enhancement, sustainable knowledge sharing. I was really pleased about the issue joint responsibility frameworks. Maybe we can make joint frameworks for security, and please ensure additional resources for managing the risks in a proper way. And there was this link, hey, perhaps we can talk with development partners to pay for these kinds of things. This is not only about humanitarian, but also about preparedness and other issues. Thank you so much, Josephine. I think we need to go further to Fadi Haliso. Josephine, you can stay with us, I hope, for the later
yes,
discussion.
I will ask.
Thank you so much. Okay, Fadi Haliso is the next speaker. He's from Lebanon. He's the director of Basme in Zetouna. And I hope you can share us your reflections on a more equal risk sharing. Please, Fadi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. First, I want to highlight the fact that I am based in Lebanon and my organization is based in Lebanon, but it is mostly a Syrian organization that was established with the Syrian crisis, and now it is operating in Lebanon, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. For the service of Syrian refugees mainly, but also host communities. So I'm going to give a Syrian perspective on humanitarian, on risk sharing in the humanitarian sector. So for us, when the COVID-19 crisis started, we found ourselves in a familiar situation where the field workers of mostly local organizations working with IDPs and refugees in Syria and its neighbors were the ones to bear the risk of being in the field, despite of the lockdown. They had to organize awareness sessions, distribute hygiene kits and food parcels to continue essential protection services. It made me realize that this sector, despite its fondness of big words like localization and risk sharing, hasn't learned much from previous crises, at least in our part of the world. As the director of a regional development and relief organization, experience with risk sharing is unfortunately full of sad memories. And frankly speaking, I don't believe there is a meaningful risk sharing going on between international and local organizations, except of some isolated cases, depending on the goodwills. The situation can be best described as risk diversion or a transfer of the risk to the weakest link in the equation, which is obviously the local partners. This reality, in my opinion, won't change unless there is a fundamental adjustment in mentality. An adjustment that stops considering local partners as small, inexperienced, who can be dictated by powerful INGOs and sometimes easy to manipulate subcontractors. Oftentimes in the Syrian context, we saw that the bulk of international organizations felt obliged to work with local organizations as a last resort, only when they lost access to local territories or it became too risky for them to have direct operation there, or when they discover a few months before the end of their contracts that they won't achieve their targets. To give you some example on what I mean with the lack of meaningful risk sharing in our context, I'm going to start with 3 examples. In a dangerous context like Syria and its surrounding countries, local organizations end up in besieged or hard to reach areas being the ones who bear the physical risk. Their staff gets killed in shelling, kidnapped, or disabled without a clear mechanism for compensation. As a local, you figure out after one of these incidents that you need a duty of care policy to bind your donors to. Good luck then in including it in your contract if your international partner did not budget it with the back donor. On so many occasions, we had to argue for months to convince our donors and their back donors to keep paying the salary of the deceased staff member just until the end of the project, or to pay for our staff reallocation when they were exposed to other regions. Things are getting better now, of course, after 9 years of the conflict, but not after some hard lessons. In addition, when there is a sudden change in the policies of host governments in surrounding countries and things get tough, international organizations can bear the brunt, while locals are often left to their fate. Internationals can pay the vengeful fines when they have incurred, withdraw their expat staff who are protected by their respective powerful embassies, and relocate to the next humanitarian crisis. Well, local organizations in this mayhem are left to their own devices, small as they are, and deprived from access to resources and big contracts. They often do not have the resources to pay any fine, and their members risk ending up in prison or deported against their will to their country of origin, where they face serious risk on their lives. And it happened a lot with our colleagues in the last few years. And finally, how do you think we end up dealing with the de-risking measures of the banking sector and financial institutions, or the difficulties arising from anti-terrorism legislation or sanctions? Often, it ends up by executive decisions taken by higher-up executives in the faraway headquarters to withdraw from Syria or the region because it is not worth the risk anymore. Knowing very well that in a system that managed to do so little progress in terms of the localization agenda, without the intermediary role of this international organization, or that local access to funds and therefore their ability to implement crucial life-saving projects will be hurt, sometimes without repair. I'm not here to lament or blame. I'm not here to say that international organizations and donors are awful. To every bad example I gave, there is always many positive ones. And throughout the years, we have been lucky enough to have forged partnerships with partners who really care. But I'm not here to tap on anyone's shoulders neither. I'm here to say that despite the goodwills and the enormous efforts, there is still a systematic failure in the sector that we are seeing again now with the COVID crisis. A failure resulting mainly from unbalanced relations of power between international organizations and local ones, unequal access to resources and funding, the change at scale mentality that stands as a great obstacle to forge meaningful partnerships between the donor agencies and local organizations. Unequal access to resources mean unequal partnerships. Over the years, and despite the talks we heard on localization since the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul, we struggled as Syrian organizations to get direct funding from donor agencies. Except of the big medical organizations that are operating on a very large scale, very few of us were able to get funding without an INGO being the intermediary lead applicant. The excuses we hear were always around the same theme. You don't have the capacity to manage big amounts of money. No matter how much effort you make to build your capacities, despite the scarcity of resources available to you for this purpose, as a local organization, you seem forever trapped in the capacity building school without any chance of a graduation ceremony. No one would tell you what is the threshold you need to pass to be considered as having enough capacity to manage big grants, a large-scale project all over Syria and surrounding countries. And without these big long-term grants, you don't have really the resources necessary to solidify your systems. What is the purpose, after all, of having a lot of these policies and procedures if you are condemned to stay small and at the mercy of unequal partnerships with organizations who are, unlike you, have the access to the donors and have their ears as well? A meaningful dialogue is something we need to tackle this systematic failure. Often I find that the idea of dialogue in the sector is distorted. When dialogue is reduced to theoretical discussions about localizations and risk sharing or any other concept through webinars, fora, and conferences, this is not really a dialogue. This is theorizing from an unequal position of power. A sincere dialogue is one that is baptized by partnership and serious work on the ground. As a positive example, I want to highlight here a partnership we managed to forge with the Syrian team at the EU. After some long discussions, we managed to form a partnership through a civil society support project with the EU through a consortium of Syrian organizations, 5 organizations. And because of the project included a sub-granting component to CBOs on the ground, you can imagine that our colleagues at the EU have some huge concerns related to risk. Fortunately, though, this is one of the examples when our dialogue helped us reach some arrangement that make everyone satisfied. Through this arrangement, the EU team can be assured the project is not breaching any EU-imposed sanctions, and the Syrian organizations as well are satisfied that they are not playing the role of a subcontractor who is dictated what to do every step of the way. Every member of the consortium is still feeling ownership of the project. This wouldn't have been possible had the EU been so adamant on working with local organizations only through the guardianship of INGOs. And I surely hope that they don't soon revert back to this mode of operation. I know it is easier to deal with one organization with a big amount of money than having to deal with a consortium of 5 or more. To conclude, I encourage every donor agency to consider similar practices. These kinds of partnerships and effective dialogues are the key to build the capacities of local organizations to satisfactory levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fadi. Thank you for sharing with us the experiences, what can lead to unequal, what the results could be of unequal partnerships, but also for sharing good examples. I did write down for myself the unequal partnerships, the unequal balance of powers. What I found very touching was, are we forever trapped in the capacity building school? And nobody tells us when the school is finished. And you keep on clarifying that we don't have the capacity to manage big grants, but we really need more funding to also take a decent position towards risk management and risk mitigation. Thank you so much, Fadi, for your broad experiences and your reflections. Howard, before we go on to the panel of international NGOs and donors, maybe we could take a quick look at the chat box and the questions and answers. What kind of messages do you receive over there?
Yeah, I'm just going to share 3 points. I may or may not represent these well. So if I get this wrong, please elaborate in the chat box. One question asked about right now with COVID-19 and the health risks that staff of national NGOs face in the response. What kind, how is that being addressed? Is there a dialogue on that? And I think that speaks to the points that Josephine was making around in Nigeria, in her experience, the lack of support for insurance and health insurance within what donors and international agencies will fund currently in the experience of her organization. Then another interesting comment about what is the fear that INGOs have in terms of what they have to fall back on. So maybe this is speaking to how risk is somehow transferred down through the chain from the back donors to the intermediaries to then the national local partners. And I know we're going to hear from Lindsay next. So just like, what is that? Better understanding that. And so where are the obstacles within what INGOs are doing and how INGOs could work differently versus what is sort of imposed from donors. And then also a question about complementarity between international and national or local actors versus kind of replacement, and how to sort of maybe shift more towards that more positive experience that Dr. Wynne was highlighting with some, with at least one fund in Myanmar, where it seems like there was this good complementarity and partnership approach in a small way starting there. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard, for sharing these first findings. I think we'll get back to the local representatives after the panel discussion with the INGO and the donors. I'm very glad we have 3 people with us who are open and willing to discuss these points and reflect from their perspectives how we can maybe move towards a different way of risk sharing, what is needed for them. We have 3 speakers for the next round. That is Lindsay Hamsik from with the international NGO perspective. We have from ECHO, Patrice Lenormand. I'm very glad you're with us, Patrice. And from DFID, Fergus Thomas. I think we start with the INGO perspective. We're building from the local towards the INGO towards the donors. I hope you understand. Lindsay works at the United States INGO network, Interaction, which conducted in-depth research on risk management and partnerships with local actors. Interaction plays a very influential role bringing the input from INGOs into the discussions with UN agencies and donors. And Lindsay is the Senior Manager of Humanitarian Policy and Practice at Interaction, full mouth. Lindsay, please share your reflections on the introductions of our local representatives and perhaps give some insights on the experiences of Interaction related to this issue. The floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Peter, and thanks for having me. I think it was really sort of striking to listen to Dr. Nguyen and Josephine and Fadi and hear their perspectives. And actually, I think Josephine, we met in Nigeria when we were conducting some of the risk research when we were there that I'll reference. And it's great to hear how Nigerian NGOs national NGOs have really inculcated some of the recommendations and learnings from that. So Interaction, just to give a little bit of background, in 2015 initiated a sort of senior level dialogue to open up what is largely a very sensitive issue around risk management within, at the time, 13 of the largest international NGOs, so that we could have some peer learning and exchange around how NGOs manage risk and the policy and practice around that. In that exercise, they also identified a second phase of the research that they wanted to examine, which was looking specifically at how our risk management policies and practices affected or did not affect, enabled or did not enable our local partnerships. And so in 2017, with funding from OFTA, Interaction initiated this research along with 10 other international NGOs to examine the partnership sort of component of the risk management chain. And I think a lot of the findings of that research, which I think many people on the call are probably familiar with, reinforce the perspectives of Dr. Nguyen, Fadi, and Josephine that you heard before. And I'm just going to kind of give you a few top line sort of points that I've been reflecting on in the context of COVID. And I want to frame those around when we talk about risk in the context of COVID, we need to untangle what are new risks that are emerging specific to COVID that are perhaps affecting local partners or frontline actors more acutely. What are risks that preceded COVID that are being exacerbated by COVID? And then what are the risks that still exist that are maybe not being exacerbated by COVID but still need to be addressed? And so I think when we talk about risk, we need, in the context of COVID, we need to understand the panoply of different dimensions and manifestations of risks and their origin. The study outlined that international NGOs have made quite a bit of progress in strengthening their sort of enterprise risk management systems, but that it also confirmed that we don't necessarily treat partners as integral to those enterprise risk managements. We view them as external to our own risk management systems rather than internal and as a core component. And that was a significant point of reflection for all of the senior leaders that were participating in the research, that they needed to think more critically, less about the risk to how we manage the risk of partners and how we integrate our thinking and risk management of how we manage the risk to partners. And that's critical in also ensuring operational continuity, program quality, and so forth. Further to that, the study also outlined and confirmed that risk management tools broadly across the board and practice broadly across the board, both within our own INGO's own direct programming, but also within their partnership models are largely weighted to fiduciary risk management. And that we see other risk areas largely under-resourced, underrepresented, and also a significant lack of analysis in how mitigating controls in relation to fiduciary risk management can potentially cause risks or emerging risks in other areas. So to give you an example on what this looks like, when donors fund national partners and local organizations through results-based costing or payment upon verification, this can create challenges in a very acute access-constrained environment where verification teams perhaps delay to go out and verify that the work has been done, and thus payments to the local partner then delay. But this creates a significant number of emerging risks that they have to shoulder the burden of because they're coping with their cash flow challenges. This can create, bad accounting practices, which, cash flow challenges always create bad accounting practices to cover program spends in other areas. It can lead to unforeseen costs and delays. It can also result in drawing down resources. Say, for example, rather than sending your staff in 2 cars to drive to the field, you send them on motorbikes, which increases their security risk. And all of these sort of fiduciary controls to manage the risk of partners tend to create perverse outcomes for local partners and frontline actors. Furthermore, the donors, and again, these fiduciary controls originate with originating donors who are consolidating their tier 1 partners into a smaller group of partners, which means that they are channeling more money through fewer partners, and they're applying greater controls that are then passed down to local partners as well. The research also found cases where financial investigations left national organizations unable to pay employees, a circumstance that's also been known to increase security risk, and it caused at least one major national organization to fold in the research that we looked at. And so again, I want to say that these compliance and fiduciary controls that begin, the genesis of them are found in government donors and UN agencies. When they're passed down, they create an array of risks across multiple risk areas, not just fiduciary risk. They create security risk, operational risk that affects program quality, and so forth. To the last point I'll say is that I think COVID is going to continue to exacerbate the scrutiny around fiduciary controls and definitely red flags. And we have to be conscious in COVID as we create more enabling financing models that allow organizations to adapt and be flexible to the reality on the ground. We also have to take into consideration that we can't levy significant investigations that curtail responses and potentially cripple local NGOs and their INGO partners at the field level. And that's because local NGOs will feel that burden, but the ultimate bearer of those investigations, the ultimate risk bearer, is the affected population. So when investigations ensue, when programs are stalled because these investigations take place, it means that life-saving assistance is not delivered to people in need. And in the context of COVID, we understand that being able to scale rapidly and adapt to different vectors of the disease, the ability to be flexible, the ability to be fast is going to be critical in mitigating any further life-saving damage to local populations. So we need to be conscious of that as we think about how we orient our response models, and also think about how we manage different control mechanisms around fiduciary risk. And the more we can move towards breaking out of the silo of fiduciary risk management compliance and look at the broad spectrum of different risk areas ranging from operational to legal and compliance to safety and security and information, the better we will be at understanding how our own controls and mitigating measures to manage the risk to us as either as a donor or as an INGO or as a local partner actually affects other humanitarian actors within a delivery context. And that's really something that we need to find a way to have a collective dialogue on, so that we can understand, yes, the issues of trust, the trust deficit that Fadi mentioned, but also that we can understand that mitigating measures are not sufficient. Mitigating measures are usually meted out as managing the risk to me as the funding agent, rather than the risk to the partnership as a whole. And that's something that needs to be thought through critically. I'll stop there because I think we have a large body, evidence body, and significant number of recommendations, many of which were reflected in Fadi and Dr. Nguyen and Josephine's comments, which are really encouraging from my side. And I will only echo that, you know, I really do see, with regard to the capacity building conversation, I really do see a role here for development actors to make sustained longer term investments in humanitarian partnership models, in humanitarian local NGOs, while they're also delivering humanitarian programs in the context of COVID or otherwise.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you so much for this call to action. I did write down for myself, breaking out of the silo of fiduciary risk management. And a nice division you make between risks with partners or risks to partners. They're two different things, and we really need to take care of it in a different way. And I'm really very glad that we have two people from a donor perspective who engage in this open discussion with us about risk management and how maybe we can move forward together. We have two speakers in this panel. Patrice Lenormand, he is head of the unit North Africa, Iraq and Arabian Peninsula of ECHO. And we have Fergus Thomas, humanitarian advisor of DFID. I'm very glad you're with us. Please, I'm really curious what ways forward you see, what kind of actions you think, based on all the testimonies we had this afternoon. What are good things to give forward, to move forward on? Perhaps did we miss some other things we should invest in? I would like to start with Patrice Lenormand. Please, the floor is yours from ECHO.
Thank you very much, Peter. Can you hear me correctly?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Yes. Thank you very much to all. It's a pleasure to be there, even if a panel of NGO asking for donors' reaction and being one of the donors is almost like assisted suicide. So I'm very happy still to be there. I happen to have been in charge before civil society in DEFCO, in our development bodies. So it's always a pleasure to have dialogue with CSO. This reminds me of a nice time. I'd like to share a few reactions on what the others have said. Thank you very much for the very interesting feedback. First, I do not see the situation as negatively as I've heard. If you have been involved like me in a donor with civil society for the last 20 years, the picture is better today than what it was when I started my career. Remember that in the 70s, ODA collapsed and disappeared, and we had to build up objective on development assistance to bring back development money because of the collapse of the funding of development through civil society. I mean, now we're back. In the EU, we're back to more than 2 billion a year. We were at maybe 500 million a few years ago. Secondly, I'm a donor. It's not my money. I'm not the Bill Gates Foundation, it's public money. I have a strong scrutiny. One of the gentlemen speakers referred to Syria. You can imagine me as a humanitarian actor supporting local CSOs in Idlib, where we are, or in the Damascus control area in Syria. I receive between 5 or 6 parliamentary questions, Court of Auditor requests. They are all targeting political questions. They are all asking me, are you financing people that might be too much in this direction or too much on this direction? Aren't you backing up people that work for Iran, for extremists? And the way it is always coming back to us is never through political question. It's always through risk on finance question. That's the painful way to attack a donor when you don't want to use political stance. So this is our daily life. Nevertheless, on the culture of risk, I again see it differently. We can take much more risk today than we could take 10 years ago. We can accept some risk. We can accept some failure. What we cannot accept is that it's not treated. So me as a donor, I see it differently. I have more latitude today to invest on risky business than I have the latitude before. Now, second point, I am a humanitarian actor. I'm not a development actor anymore. It's not the same relationship. When you work on humanitarian affairs, on conflict, you have to take risk. It's part of the business. So you will have much more risk acceptance by a donor when you work on mitigation, peacemaking operation, or hardcore humanitarian business, where we are risk lover by nature. The development family, where you have a more long-term investment, where you have a more difficult relationship to the state because that's core of your DNA, that's another story. Then, as a all development person moving to the humanitarian world, it's shocking, the question of localization in the humanitarian world. Somebody referred to the grand bargain. I can be very blunt because I said that in every single internal meeting. The grand bargain was a failure on localization. It's a failure on localization. The humanitarian world has not made yet the move. And I'm not talking about implementation. Yes, it's not in implementation. I'm talking about commitment. We have not made the commitment that has been done by the development family with CSO 10 years ago. So if you ask me, organize the World Humanitarian Summit 2 and do it only on localization, you will make this culture shift that has been mentioned by several people. When it gets to the EU, we are committed to the local agenda. We are 8%, 5% of the world population, 17% of GDP, 50% of the ODA, and 2/3 of funding going through local CSOs worldwide. So your target is very easy. Make a World Humanitarian Summit 2 and target the big donors that are actually not European and not practicing such level of commitment. Now, on the notion of risk, I'm not sure the financial risk is something you cannot play with. As a donor, you need to ensure that the money is there. You can accept some problems if the partners are solving the problems. You have way of working with local NGO to turn this thing. Somebody mentioned it, that's true. We cannot work with every single local organization. We will always need some intermediaries, that's clear. Some of them could be local, or let's say from the region. Working on election with ZESA, South African organization, is as good for Zambia than working maybe with the Dutch Multi-Party Institute. Why not? The real risk at the moment I'm seeing is not the fiduciary one. That's the traditional one, is there. We can build more flexibility. The real risk is the shrinking space of civil society. And that's where, as a donor, you have this big question. The COVID risk for humanitarian actors, it's not different than working on Ebola or working on war zone. We work on frontline with partners. They can be killed as much as with COVID. So I don't see the COVID is changing conceptually the notion of risk. What is changing is the fact that we can travel less, so we rely more on local partners as first responder. And when it gets to the EU, I don't know if you followed, but the EU has put in place a recovery plan for COVID, which is mainly within Europe. We managed to obtain a massive funding for a recovery plan in third country, 5 billion euro over 3 years. And massive part of this plan will be to actually reinforce not the capacity in the sense of the old capacity building program, but in the sense of the operation build-up of local partners from the civil society. So on that, I think that's a good thing. What I see more as a risk is really the shrinking space. In human rights or governance area, NGOs have faced the shrinking space for years. On development, less, more now. On the humanitarian affairs area was quite protected. Now is getting the shrinking space hard in the face the last 5 years. That's where you have a problem as a donor. I'm working on Yemen. The de facto authority on the north on Yemen have been created some very strong constraints on CSO. My problem is that I cannot accept them for political reasons or for accountability reasons. But I have a problem with them because they are exposing my partners. So my notion of risk is also including the exposure of the local partners. And that's the real one that you are facing there. The duty of care, you will have donors that accept it, play it, don't play it for the legal responsibility, but you could find a way to have mitigating measures. The real risk for me is this notion of shrinking space, because development donors don't want to destroy their relationship with a third country. Humanitarian actors don't want to expose their partner. And in the humanitarian world, you will always have the same notion. How far are we ready to get access? Am I ready to tolerate corruption? Why not? But to which level? Am I ready to accept risk, including for marginalization? But to which level? And unfortunately, this shrinking space is moving this tolerance level. So sorry for that. It's very interesting discussion. I don't want to go and negatively. I intend it to be constructive, but there is always a notion as a donor when we discuss this thing. Donors versus local NGOs. I'd like also sometime to remember that donors might be more interested in working with local NGOs than you think. And then sometimes the intermediary they're working with, which are INGOs, are a little bit less motivated for such a shift of funding issue. Somebody mentioned, I think our colleague from Nigeria, the insurance in a contract. I will put an insurance in a contract without any problem. A few years ago, we asked some to DEFCO partners to have social standards in their program, making sure that our partners will implement social standards in terms of retiring fund, pension fund, social security, and so on. And that was a huge civil war with our partners because this is creating a lot of internal pressure. So I think this debate is a debate where it's a triangle debate. And I am convinced you need another huge international movement to make it happen based on all the nice experience I've heard. And if I say again, let's have the World Humanitarian Summit 2 on localization. Over to you. Sorry, I've been long, but I'm passionate about this issue. Over.
Thank you so much, Patrice. And it's good that you're passionate, and always good to get also a historical perspective. Things are better than 20 years ago. Thank you for that. You're really worried about progress on localization and on the shrinking humanitarian space, and you offered some openings, like indicating if you put insurances or if you put social security in your programs, in your budget lines, there should be possibilities to take those budget lines within programs and projects. Thank you so much. And we really need a World Humanitarian Summit 2 on localization. We will work on it. Thank you. I think we should quickly move on to the other donor who was prepared to discuss openly with us the possibilities on other ways of risk sharing. Fergus Thomas, Humanitarian Advisor of DFID. Are you there, Fergus? Could you share with us the ideas you think that is worthwhile to elaborate on? Please, the floor is yours.
Absolutely, and I want to be quite quick because I think the conversation and the discussion is much more important than listening to the opinions of donors, probably. We absolutely acknowledge that the local actors play the most vital role in every single context that we work in, and that they're the ones that respond, and that our contribution as the international community is so insignificant compared to the role that local communities play as they respond in rapid onset contexts, as well as in fragile and conflict affected states. I think that my colleague from Patrice has kind of really outlined the kind of constraints that we have, and sort of outlined the fact that we've become very preoccupied and very developed a very elaborate set of systems to manage risk in the work that we do as donors. So we have risk registers, and we have contingency planning, evacuation planning, safeguarding procedures, etc., etc. I think as well, he was right in pointing out some of those exposures, some of the vulnerabilities that we have as donors. And I think maybe he did point out most of them, but maybe it's also worth commenting on the counter-terrorism risks that we always have to mitigate. And lately, a very political one in the UK, the whole issue around the misbehaviour of aid workers and a perception that that's led to aid workers abusing power and abusing resources. So that whole sort of safeguarding movement has led us as a government, who are answerable at the end of the day to the people that pay taxes, to be very transparent and clear about the way that we spend the funding. I think so. We do have quite a restricted space to look at these issues and what we do, and I think any of the work that we do is unfortunately, I would say, looking at incremental changes, incremental but sustainable change to the way that we work. I think one big picture thing that we're thinking, which is quite in contrast to Patrice's line of discussion about the clear division between development work and humanitarian work, is that we're seeing that humanitarian episodes are merely spikes in a development process in a country, so that the need really to continue this line of thinking that we've been discussing today about how do we make the linkages between humanitarian and development. So that whole kind of cliched word of the nexus is really quite important to the way that we view, the way we respond to spikes in humanitarian need and vulnerability that come within a continuum of a development process for a country. So I think just really quickly, there are kind of 3 or 4 areas that we've been thinking about ways to really do some sustainable incremental change in the way that we work. One is through influencing the multilaterals. It's a really shocking and sad fact that still about 66% of humanitarian funding goes through the UN agencies, and that they are, as we all know, and I think Dr. Wynne really highlighted this really well when he was talking about how difficult it is to do business with a UN agency as a local partner. But we can see some margin to influence them and to maneuver them. I think especially worth pointing out the fact that the country-based pool funds now are allocating greater and greater percentages of funding to local partners, and that's also maybe part of the solution on the risk sharing, is to look at more and more pressure on the UN to use country-based pool funds, and indeed SURF spend as well, on how they work with local partners. We're putting pressure on them, for example, about the way that they charge indirect costs to downstream partners, so that they allow local partners to charge the same downstream costs that first-tier partners would charge. And to give them more ownership of their own risk management systems. And we're also pushing them to honour those commitments that were made about longer grant cycles, so that local partners have the same ability to plan over multiple years for their programming, and have a greater flex there to really do more intelligent long-term planning. In our own COVID-19 response recently, we released a rapid response facility load of funding for NGO partners to respond, and we've been really encouraging localization, and we've actually asked all of the partners that are funded to demonstrate how much funding they're going to give to local partners through that. We've also included stipulations that people should be very flexible on no cost extensions, on flexibility across budget lines, and so on, and so forth. We've also, just to maybe speak to one of the comments that Josephine made, we've also said that there's flexibility within our grants for people to use funding for PPE and for security risk management. That's also a discussion that we've been having a lot with GISF, and a useful change that we've made to our funding to allow local partners to make provisions for security risk management. And then within as well, sorry, this is super geeky, but I think it's also quite significant. We've introduced the harmonized donor reporting template, the 8+3 reporting template for the RRF, for the COVID response. So this is hopefully a shared common reporting template that all partners, local or international, can use. And we've also insisted on the funding transfer of the non-project attributable costs. So essentially the headquarters costs should be allowable to local partners, because often you see that you have first-tier INGOs charging quite a fat NPAC, justifying it against sort of security risk and access difficulties and so on, but they never pass that on to local partners. But we want to give that power to the local partners as well, to have that same access to NPAC. The last one, which is my own personal geek favorite, is looking at due diligence processes. We've been doing a lot of work through the START network, which has been really interesting, looking at tiered due diligence. START Bangladesh is a really good example of that, and I'm sure some of the colleagues from Bangladesh on the line might be able to add more detail to that. But we've also been really interested in the process about aligning our due diligence with certification against the core humanitarian standard. And this notion that basically, if you look at the contents of the core humanitarian standard and compare it with the due diligence assessment of any major donor, that there's a huge crossover. So what about this idea then that we have a standard certification? At the moment, there's one organization that does quality assurance against the CHS in Geneva, the HCI quality assurance. What about if we help local partners to get certified, to kind of have a due diligence passport and a universally accepted due diligence that would allow them then to be recognized as legitimate recipients of funds. ECHO, I think, and maybe Patrice can speak to this, I think there's some, in the latest ECHO guidance, some interesting comment on the HCI certification against the CHS. It's a really interesting area to think that if we could have one, essentially one due diligence for each partner, that would just save an enormous amount of time and money for many people to qualify for funding. So I'll just really really sort of last couple of observations. There are these processes that seem very small, but as I say, small changes can add up, and we hope that we can bring some changes to the way that it works. We're not happy with the kind of current discussion about capacity building. We think the model is really flawed and needs a complete rethink, and I think a lot of the work that people like Christian Aid and Action Aid have done looking at the shifting the power studies around localization, that really needs to be focused on. I think number two, doing localization is very difficult. I was talking with colleagues from TROCRA in Ireland about the HARP program and about actually, the process of letting go of control, and I think this was raised by Patrice, of shifting the power, of surrendering control of financial oversight is incredibly challenging, and it's not going to be easy. And maybe one reason that we're still struggling with this process so much is that this is a really difficult program. So loads of difficulties, but I think then what is essential, and finally I'd say that we need to keep on the dialogue. The donors are not going to come up with the answers. I think practitioners in the field, people working in this area should really help to inform us about how we should best shift the power. And we should, as donors, probably come together a lot more to think about other ways of being able to incentivize direct support to local partners. So dialogue. That's, I think, where we're at, and we need to move that forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fergus Thomas. The answers and the possible solutions must come from a dialogue with the people in the field, from local actors. I cherry picked some suggestions you give to us. The due diligence passport, of course, HQ costs should be allowable. Put pressure on the UN for country-based pooled funds. And thank you also for emphasizing the importance of localization and bringing in also the linking between humanitarian and development issues. I really hope we have another round. We have time for one quick round to all speakers, but I'll first check with Howard, because I think there's lots going on in the Q&A box and in the chat box. Perhaps, Howard, you can give us another update and pick point for us, one or maybe two questions we could share with all we could pose to all the panelists and other speakers of today. Howard, could you give yes, please.
So Hero from Iraq picked up on this concept of capacity sharing, local to local capacity sharing, and how to build consensus and support for that, and maybe picking up on some of the points that Dr. Wynne was sharing in his presentation and others were making about how to understand and address risk, then that collaborate and to have influence and voice as local and national NGOs, collaboration between them, and that being supported both to build their capacity on risk management and understand and analyze risk, but then also to have that dialogue with intermediaries or donors. What do people think about how to sort of accelerate progress on that and make that more the norm rather than the kind of current international to local capacity strengthening kind of top-down model? And then Gareth raised the question around how one INGO, when it had shared in Pakistan in an honest way, learning from challenges faced, it then faced funding being cut and a sort of hounding in the media, hostile media coverage. And so how, whether in public or in the more private kind of relations between donors, intermediaries and local actors, or between local actors and donors, how to create that kind of space for an honest conversation. And as Patrice was saying, maybe where individual there's not zero tolerance for individual incidents, but it's rather about inaction and patterns and a failure to follow up on learning from them. Those would be 2 points. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Howard. I think we only have 15 minutes left, and we really would like to give all panelists and speakers the opportunity to share their thoughts. Maybe they pick out 1 or 2 things that really need to be taken up from here. But before we go to all the panelists and speakers, there is one person I see he is in the room from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in the Netherlands. It's Björn Hofman. He's well involved in the preparations and the activities of the eminent person of the Grand Bargain. We did hear a lot about the Grand Bargain, about localization, and they are also initiating some interesting research on risk sharing. Björn, is it able to participate for 1 minute in the conversation and maybe share an update on the activities of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on risk sharing, and maybe give some insights on activities towards the Grand Bargain conferences that are coming up?
Thank you, well, Peter. Can you understand me? Yes, huh?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect.
Thank you for being
Super.
here.
Of course, thanks, Peter. And of course, thanks to Kuno for organizing the webinar and Peter for skillfully leading it. And of course, thanks to all the panelists. I think it was really important to get your insights again on the table, and also to hear some reflections from, of course, colleague donors, how they address some of the risk sharing elements. As Howard had said right at the beginning of the webinar, indeed, the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, together with the ICRC, for some time now, we did indeed agree to have a further look at this topic of risk and risk sharing. And I think we've heard today that indeed it is, there are many faces to risk. Risk comes in different forms and shapes. And I just indeed wanted to share 2 sentences of where we are today in our commitment to take this conversation forward. I think, again, if we go beyond just the silo of fiduciary risk, as Lindsay, you've said, and look at risk more broadly, then we'll quickly find that indeed there is already a lot of body of evidence out there. So we don't need to re-establish the body of evidence. But we also see that risk is indeed discussed in very different fora. And also including outside the humanitarian world, because clearly some of those discussions are having a direct impact on humanitarian actors. So clearly, our dear colleague from DFID said dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. So that is indeed what we're looking at. We wanted to organize an expert level meeting that needed to be postponed due to the COVID response, but we still would like to see if there is and what role the Grand Bargain format, in which a lot of organizations are sitting, can contribute to this conversation. Again, it is a contribution to an ongoing conversation. And we're at the moment preparing that conversation, which is going to take place at the annual meeting of the Grand Bargain, to figure out how and if the Grand Bargain can contribute to take this risk-sharing conversation forward. Again, it's not about finding the one silver bullet, but rather to make a meaningful contribution to complement all the conversations that are ongoing. The idea is, of course, to help unlock some of the commitments in the Grand Bargain that we have made. So fully, wholeheartedly agree, it is about dialogue. This conversation is taking place in different fora, and our question is, what contribution can the Grand Bargain make to help unlock some of those? Thank you very much, Peter.
Oh, thank you very much, Björn, for this update. I'm looking at the clock. We have said 19 minutes, 19:90, and we have 10 minutes left, and we have many, many speakers. And I really would like to hear both from the local representatives what they think are really points we should take forward. But I will also like to give the opportunity to the other speakers to reflect on all the things we learned today. I think it would be fair to give the LNGOs, the national NGOs, to share 2 or 3 points, and all the others can only get 1 from me. I hope everybody can agree on that for me. And I will give the people in the same order the floor as we have done from the beginning. So I hope everybody thinks this is okay. And I would like to start with Dr. Wynn. And we have learned a lot this afternoon. And I really would like to hear from you if you have to choose 1, 2, maybe 3 issues to move forward upon. Which 2 would it be? Dr. Wynn, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still with you.
Okay, please.
As you may see, I think risk management is the multi-dimensional issues. At this moment, we are very much focused on finance area, but actually finance risk management is not sufficient to tackle those risk issues. That's why I was repeatedly mentioning about the institutional capacity development for the local, so that comprehensively we can manage the risk. So this is my one suggestion. Second one is, as one of the speakers mentioning, a number of speakers mentioned, there is a shrinking civil society space, which is very true. In this shrinking space, what we have to do is we have to pull these civil society together in one platform. Individually, we will not survive. If you stand alone, you will fail. You will be out of the scenario. So my proposal is allow the civil society to come as the collective platform, and then all the donors to support those collective platforms so that we, the civil society, can also collectively share those risk management experience among ourselves. As I mentioned, local to local capacity building can happen through those platforms, and we can address a number of issues together. So it's another level of risk management, not to civil society to wipe out of this national political, economic, and social scenario, but rather we still become a very important player. We play a very good watchdog role. At the same time, we manage the risk together. So that's my two opinions and 2 recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wynn. Josephine, your main takeaways or your main follow-up points for us also. You have to unmute yourself, Josephine, or shall I do it?
Yeah.
Ah, there you are.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity once again. I really do appreciate that the last speaker just took a bit of words from me, because it looks like many of our colleagues, particularly our international partners, are really, really happy when we're not coordinated. I think some people take advantage of the fact that the local organizations may not have the strong coordination that they should have. I would recommend that donors particularly should pay attention to the funding of coordinating local organizations to bring them back into a voice. It is possible to do this. We exist because we want to solve problems. We want to see how we can support when issues come up. And the lack of coordination among local partners should be an interesting one for someone who will actually deliberately take out time to say, okay, I fund you to see how we can see local organizations, particularly in Nigeria, come together and not taking advantage of the proliferation of the local organizations and putting them against each other to ensure that some people feed fat on that. So please, one of my strong recommendations will be that coordination should be supported strongly. And the second recommendation should be that it is possible. It is possible to to get donors to see the intermediaries. And I'm not talking about sub granting. I'm talking about intermediary granting, you know, for partners to see the potential of local partners who can actually take the hands of the other local partner and support that local partner to be able to get to the point where they will be getting that license, you know, that passport that the DFID colleague talked about. I'm very excited about that, so that we don't overburden the local partners when they are implementing. When we have a due diligence, it can happen within this, this taking a civil society, another colleague by hand and supporting this colleague to be able to come to the level where you are with the due diligence that you have done. It's cost effective, it's less investment for the donor. So if we pay attention to these two key suggestions, and donors checking with their the partners that they're giving, the INGOs that they are funding, donors should pay attention to the lines of security, to the lines of insurances. I mean, if you put money there, make sure that the response coming back to you, it's measurable enough and qualifies for what monies that you have put in there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine. So we can save money. That's a good argument. We can always do that. Fadi, please, the floor is yours.
I think I've picked up two terms from the interventions of our colleagues from the donors community. I think I would like to stress on the concept of shifting the power that Ferguson highlighted. We need this so much. At least shift the dynamics of power by not making everything in this sector around one INGOs that subcontract others. Even if there is an intermediary INGO, which we welcome when this organization is someone we share the values with, it should be more of a partnership, not subcontracting relationship. And this could really help us in the dialogue on risk sharing and the localization. In the concept of intermediary local organization, I also highlighted by Fabrice, I also think this is important, and this is, I think, from a Syrian perspective, we've been hearing these calls from donors since London's conference for donors on Syria, which later on shifted to be Brussels conference. And I remember at the time, a colleague from an American agency asked us, why don't you form coalition or consortia or umbrella organizations? And over the years, there has been many examples of such things, big and powerful local organizations teaming up together to form these intermediary between donors and smaller local organizations on the ground. But the amount of funding that went through this channel is still very small, very little. And I believe there is a need for a political change and mentality change again at the donors level to make this leap of faith and start trusting local entities, whether they are one single organization or umbrella. And actually the project I brought as an example of good practices and good examples with the EU is exactly this. It was a consortium of 5 good established organizations who are trying to be this umbrella and sub-grant other local organizations on the ground, Syrian organization. And at the same time, it plays the role that Dr. Wynne said about peer capacity building and local learning and shared capacity. This is the whole concept of the project, was to help each other build our capacities, transfer it to local CBOs and grassroots groups. And this is advancing, but if the support of such initiatives is still limited, then it will evaporate over the time.
Thank you so much, Fadi. I thank all the representatives of local organizations, national organizations, to be so open and so thorough to inform us on the things you encounter in your work. We have, I think, Only 1 minute left, but I really would like to learn from the INGO and the donor representatives. I only can give you like 30 seconds, but please, your last urgent comment or your main learning of this afternoon, can you please share some last words with us? And I start in the same order as we did before. Lindsay, are you still with us? Can you share your last comment or your last,
my last comment would be, I think insurance, if we think about insurance, that's risk sharing. And insurance plans work when everybody contributes to them equitably in terms of a premium. And that means that everybody needs to apply standard support costs and ICRs to their local partners. And that includes UN agencies, INGOs, and donors. Secondly, use the framework that Interaction identified to talk about risk and break down the fiduciary kind of lens or over focus and emphasis, and look at risk across all of the different categories of risk. There's 8 or 9 categories, including reputational and ethical. And lastly, evaluate risks to you as a donor. This applies to INGOs, donors, and UN agencies. But also when you're looking at risk, evaluate the risks your work and your parameters to your partners pose to your partners themselves in the delivery of assistance, so that we can get beyond evaluating the risk to one rather than, or get to evaluating the risk to all rather than evaluating the risk to one. Over.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Patrice Lenormand, what's the main thing you take with you, or your last urgent comments?
First, to thank everybody for the input. That's always useful for a donor. Me, I just one message I will keep myself is to move from the notion of risk to the notion of investment, and to do that by still being careful to separate civil society when they are an actor of public life, as they have and they should be, when they are an operator, and when we are discussing their capacity building. These 3 different categories with 3 different ways of addressing the issue. I would like to take the occasion to respond to the lady from Nigeria. Yes, absolutely right on coordination. That's something we need to invest. But on 2/3 of the country, this will have to be carefully managed, or you will get the Gongo's platform. So we should have a discussion with the real civil society to avoid that coordination, hence in having a coordination led by the government in a political biased manner. So I just end in thanking you all, and I hope I see you in the World Humanitarian Summit 2 that you will organize. Over.
Thank you so much, Patrice. Fergus Thelmus, your last urgent call.
Yeah, I think clearly the future of humanitarianism will be defined by this issue of localization. And I think the most interesting thing I've learned today is this notion of the difference between risk transfer and risk partnerships. And I think that we need to look at the way that we move from transferring risk to sharing risk as a community, and a new kind of humanitarianism that is aware of rights, aware of human rights, and aware of the role and the risks of ignoring civil society. So I think there's a way that we can maintain a very strong humanitarian position and yet become slightly more politically astute and understand the importance of this agenda going forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Thomas. I want to thank also all the speakers from the INGOs and the donors. And I think it's almost time for the wrap up by Inge. Inge has been listening one and a half hour very carefully, I think. And I've making lots and lots of notes, Inge. What are your main takeaways? Could you wrap up for us? Are you still? Yeah.
I think, I indeed made notes and I was listening, and I think it was an incredibly rich discussion with many different perspectives, but also what I saw is that there are so many ideas and so many also very practical ways forward. So at a certain moment I wrote down, let's just do it also, because I've been also in a number of discussions on localization, on risk sharing and risk management, and sometimes I feel we know the steps we can take and we just need to do it also. And that has to do with what many especially also people also in the chat said, but we need, to shift power, to have a culture change, to have a change of mentality, And that means for all of us also to let go a bit of our control, but also sometimes for the maybe the national players also to have more networking, less competition, more working together at their part. The other thing that I felt was really important was also to realize what Patrice said, there is a real shrinking space for civil society in many, many countries. And it's not only, let's say, it's even also in European countries that you sometimes can see that there are anti-terrorism measures, etc., legislation. That's really, really important to collaborate together to address these shrinking spaces in many countries. And the last one, I think that some people already said that, the dialogue, but also in our dialogue, going deeper into breaking down what's going on, what are the risks, and how can we handle them. I think that's really very, very important to continue that at different levels. And I actually wanted to close with challenging all of us in our different organizations with different positions, also to, you know, in our own organization, also to be kind of agents of change, to try to really push for concrete actions and to taking this whole risk sharing issue further in our own organizations, reaching out also to others to do it together where necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Inge. Thank you, Inge Leuvings. She's co-chair of the Localization Working Group of the Dutch Relief Alliance here in the Netherlands. I want to thank all speakers. I'm going to call them one by one for the last time: Dr. Win Tu Ying, Josephine Heba, Fadi Halisho, Patrice Lenormand, Fergus Thomas, Lindsay Hamsik, and of course my co-host Inge and Howard Mullet. Thank you so much for supporting me. Also many, many thanks to the co-organizers of this event, Charter for Change, the Global Interagency Security Forum, the DRA, CAFOD, and Kuno, of course. We will make a video and a report of this session, and we will share it as soon as possible. And we also try to include the comments of the chats and ask the questions asked in the Q&A box. And what I remember is, I think we need a mental shift. It was stressed by all local representatives, I think. And Inge said, let's just do it. Thank you so much, everybody, and hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.